If you're a high-achieving woman who's exhausted by stress, stuck in constant conflict, and tired of being overlooked in the exact rooms where you know you were born to lead, then this podcast is for you. So here's your host, Paula V. Jane.
Welcome back to Her Boss Brain, where we explore how leaders move from reacting to what's happening around them to leading consciously, especially under pressure. One of the themes that keeps coming up in this season is this: performance doesn't break down because leaders lack capability. It breaks down when connection erodes. This matters deeply right now. Gallup reports that only 23% of employees globally feel engaged at work. And for women leaders in particular, disengagement is often tied not to lack of ambition, but to isolation, invisibility, and burnout. And today's conversation sits right at the intersection of leadership, belonging, and community at scale. My guest is Annette Gregg, CEO of the Society for Incentive Travel Excellence, SITE. Annette leads a global community of more than 3,700 members, guiding growth in a lean, board governed organization while preserving the human core of leadership. With an MBA in executive experience across corporate, association, nonprofit leadership, she is widely respected for building community as a strategic asset, not a nice to have. But Annette's leadership story isn't just about scale and success. It also includes moments of rebuilding confidence, reclaiming her inner leadership, which ultimately led her to create spaces like the RISE conference, empowering women to step fully into their voice. I am so excited to talk to Annette today. Annette, welcome to Her Boss Brain.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just such a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And I see you nice, brimming with joy. So if you're good to go, then we can just dive into so many facets that I want to talk to you about.
Sure, let's do it.
All right. So let's start from the beginning, right? And before the CEO title and the global stage, when you look back, what really first drew you to the work of bringing people together, and what did you not yet realize you were learning about leadership at the time?
Yeah, I love the whole way that you set up the conversation today, just around community and engagement. And it is an isolated world we're living in that's getting more and more polarized. And I was fortunate to find a profession that I feel really has a greater calling, which is bringing people together. I mean, I truly believe humans are meant to be together. We have so much data now around neuroscience and how the brain is activated when we're in community. We know the blue zones, some of that great blue zones work that was done, and shows that the longest living groups of people claim that being in community is one of the reasons why. It's not just eating healthy and not smoking, right? So it's, for me, I think that I started doing the work about 30 years ago in the business event space, conferences, trade shows, and then really understanding the greater impact that bringing people together has had. Really started becoming evident kind of in some of these disruptions we've had. So in my career, massive disruptions from 9/11, and then we had, the 2008, 2009 economic downturn, and then of course the pandemic. And so in each of those times, of mass disruption, there tends to be an isolation effect, and people kind of withdraw, or they get very afraid and fearful. And we've seen kind of how that's broken down progress. Really, people isolating causes high levels of depression. And, absolutely innovation stops because people are kind of hunkering down and they're just trying to self-preserve. So for me, the magic of bringing people together in what we do, the business event space, just not only drives business forward, but it really drives humanity forward. And I'm just honored to be in the career that brings people together.
Yeah, that makes so much sense and so true on so many levels that you just mentioned. I think we don't see the impact it's really happening on our societies, and how, like, even after COVID, right? People felt that urge to that isolation. And I was just reading a stat a few months ago, and it said 1 out of 2 Americans are feeling alone. I mean, what happened to the other one? Like, it's just so bad, right? So it makes perfect sense. And it's so amazing, like, when you have leaders like you in these spaces, creating those communities, it's really the human element that comes out, which is what make people connect, right? It's not sending DMs, not sending 100 LinkedIn messages. It's the real connection that matters. So I know you've also taught at, San Diego State University and held senior revenue leadership roles. How did teaching shape the way you show up today? Because I'm sure there is some facet of that.
Yeah, I love teaching. And for me, it's a connection with the audience. So to be honest, in-person teaching is my favorite because I've also taught virtually online, or I've had to pre-record my master's degree sessions and then the students watch it and then we have office hours. And I realized after doing that for a few years, it's not nearly as fulfilling as really just being in the classroom. And so I did do that for years. And I think part of the joy for me in that is really just unlocking the audience, seeing some of the ahas, really having it, there's kind of iterative conversation instead of me or the teacher as the expert imparting knowledge. It's really presenting a topic and drawing out the audience. And these are adult learners for the most part. I've taught adult professionals. So we ended up getting into a lot of space around kind of self-analysis and professional, where they might be hitting some roadblocks professionally that they weren't even aware of. And so that's really amazing when you see kind of the aha moment in students and they're like, gosh, I thought it was a problem with my knowledge, but it's actually a problem with my self-branding or my self-talk or my ability to present clearly. And so I think really teaching both sides, I've taught undergrads, graduate students, and also professional learners. I think what we're realizing is that the undergrad space really teaches a lot of the mechanics of a profession, at least in our profession. And that is absolutely necessary. You need some fundamental baseline knowledge. But when it comes to succeeding in the workplace, that is a layer that comes with time, but also with just a different topical learning. I mean, so we ended up layering on in some of these programs, getting back to some of these topics I talked about, self-limiting beliefs. How do you self-brand yourself, instead of talking about what you do for a living, talking about who you are as a professional and as a person. So those were some of my favorite classes to teach, is just helping the person unlock their own potential that way.
And it's also, I think, a testament to you because you go to that next level of teaching the students. It sounds like your own leadership for you began with awareness, not authority, because I think that's the key. And that's something I often see in leaders who sustain impact over time, to be very honest. So, I mean, and then pivoting into, I know there was something happened that in your life that also shows me your resilience and how that inner anchoring was so strong because, when we were discussing your profile and everything, you've spoken openly about a mid-career layoff for you where your voice wasn't fully heard. And I really want you to talk to our women audience here today that what did rebuilding confidence actually require and how does that experience shape how you lead today?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the hindsight and just the ability, the older you get, the ability you have to look back and really get some learnings out of everything. And when I think about my early career, so probably in my 20s, relying heavily on kind of my knowledge and my hard work. And I think that tends to be what women do, is they want to be the hardest working person in the room. And, hard work is great and hard work is kind of table stakes. And I think that I made the mistake that hard work should be enough. And I wasn't really building key relationships or even just making myself vulnerable and approachable. So I have a couple stories I'd like to share. One of my first aha moments, I think I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s. And one of my current leaders sent me to a management course. And it was with all sorts of mid-level managers from different types of industries, not necessarily in mine. And we were put in this kind of incubator case study activity for a professional analysts. We're taking a look at how we conducted ourselves throughout the exercise. And then they would give us kind of a debrief, one-on-one debrief at the end. So a real gift, to be honest. And so my coach at the end of the week said, hey, Annette, it's no doubt that you accomplished everything that we set out for you to do. You were that A student. You did it efficiently. But when I look at how you got the work done, you didn't ask for help once the entire week. And he said, I'm not only worried about you being able to advance professionally, but I think you could be in for a really lonely life if you don't make yourself a little more vulnerable and ask for help. And I thought, wow, that was pretty gutsy of that guy to say that to me, but then it really started making me think, like, what is my learning here, And so just a few years later, I was in probably the biggest company, was a billion-dollar company, financial services company, which is primarily a male-driven industry, leading their corporate events team. And I thought, again, I was nailing it. I had all the accomplishments, exceeding goals, bringing new ideas, smartest person in the room, right? Or one of the smartest, a lot of smart people there.
Yeah.
And I got laid off. And it really, now I had also, up to then, I had been reduced in force or, a victim, if you will, of layoffs before. But
Yes.
this one really got me because I just didn't see it coming. I really thought I was firing all cylinders, and took me a while to understand and really unpack why I was feeling so insecure about it. Because I'm not afraid of change. I'm not afraid of getting
Yes.
new jobs. I wasn't in love with the job. I just thought I was nailing it. So I took some time to really kind of dive deep and take some of the learning I had from some of those previous coaching sessions. I also read a great book from Brene Brown called Rising Strong, which just really hit me at the right time. And part of the chapters that really hit me were just really trying to understand why my response was the way it was.
Yeah.
And again, job change is a job change, but why did this one bother me so much? And what were some of the internal and underlying insecurities that it was triggering for me? So that was helpful to unpack that. And so then what I realized is some of this soul searching and depression and self, analysis I was going through was common. That now I was in my 40s. And I had a lot of friends going through kind of life changes. They were going through a divorce, or maybe their kids were now out of going to college and they wanted to re-enter the workforce, but completely insecure about how to get a job after being a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
Or they had gotten laid off. And I thought, boy, and especially just a lot of women. I was in some women's groups at the time, and I thought, boy, we have to kind of circle the wagons and help each other out, because
Yes.
we are awesome. And being a stay-at-home mom for 20 years is a job and has transferable skills. And I just felt like we got to help each other get back on our game, get our swerve back. And so I launched a couple conferences. I launched a conference that year called the Rise Up Women's Conference.
Yes.
And it was taking a lot of the curriculum that I had been teaching at San Diego State about self-limiting beliefs and branding and repositioning yourself. And then I brought in a lot of guest speakers from my women's network that I was in, just people that had survived life disruptions and just really inspiring stories. So it turned it into a 1.5-day conference, ended up doing about 3 or 4 of those over the next few years. So for me, it was just a way that I had to help others. Since I was going through this soul searching process myself, I really felt the need to help others that were possibly going through a similar experience.
That is so inspiring. Oh my God, so many reflective moments for me as you were talking about these things. It was kind of, my brain was going everywhere. I was trying to be super present, but there were so many nuggets, what you just said, in the realities of what happened. And I think it is very important for our listeners to also experience, because I was under that impression that, oh, everybody else have it all together and I'm the one who is falling behind or doesn't know what I'm doing. But we have all gone through something or the other in our lives, and we're all in reinventing ourselves. And honestly, with my work, and that's kind of how my pivot happened from my corporate job to now doing these workshops and sessions for all these amazing people out there. But this comes up often in my work, with especially with high performing women, and kind of what you said, like when external validation disappears, it exposes how much confidence we have actually anchored outside, either in our title, either proximity to power, or being needed, right? And rebuilding isn't about proving, it's about reclaiming. So I just want to give like a quick neuroscience perspective to our listeners that when our thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, is online, we have access to clarity, perspective, and choice. But what happens is, under pressure, it's often the first thing to go offline, and we default to habit, reactivity, survival, what we have seen others do in front of us, right? So I really want to point out here that the leaders who sustain impact aren't the ones under the least pressure. They are the ones who know how to bring that thinking brain back online, which we call here the boss brain, especially when it matters most. And Annette, your journey really feels like a powerful example of that, because you took disruption and turned it into something that didn't just restore you, but it uplifted women around you through one of the example that we were discussing, Rise, right?
Yeah,
So
thank you. And the journey's been fascinating for me because it's also very powerful to understand your own reactions and the why behind your own reactions. So back to what you said, kind of getting control of the monkey brain, right? And it's like, hey, I actually understand and accept my responses now. It's okay to feel lousy for a little bit. I don't need to just move on. And so I actually, first of all, needed to let myself kind of sit in the muck for a little bit. And not for too long, but I think my tendency is just to move on and get on with things and get on to the next project. And I really needed to peel back the onion and understand, because I don't want to keep making
yes,
same choice,
yes,
wrong choices or reactions. But to your other point about neuroscience is I also took some time to understand unconscious bias during this time. And I really took a deep dive in that. And I was also very committed to DEI and am committed to diversity, equity, inclusion programs, because I got some consulting work during this downtime. And I realized that the woman's voice, at least in the company I was in, seemed to be shut down pretty considerably. And it is a male field, but it was the first job I was in that I kind of observed, wow, like women are not feeling safe to speak up here. And they're being kind of collectively shut down in co-ed meetings. And I thought, what is that about? So I just did a lot of work on that and helping women's empowerment programs, even with some corporations. But the unconscious bias work and learning just helped me understand about some of my own behavior and how it might be triggering to others. Me
yes,
not being vulnerable. Vulnerability is not a bad word. We all know this now. Brene Brown has helped us, embrace vulnerability. People want to be needed. And so my approach of, no, I'm so strong, I'm so independent, and I'm so smart, I don't need anybody, help somebody else. That doesn't help people feel like they can contribute to my journey. And it wants to be, contribute. They need help and they want to be asked for help. And so, really reaching those relationships and getting, some people call it workplace politics. Let's just call it that, because I know politics gets a bad rap.
yep,
But you kind of you have to get in the game there. You have to make strategic relationships. And you're not only in the current position and job or company you might work for, but looking outside, so what is somebody that can mentor you? Who's an
yes.
influencer in your industry that you just need to ask advice and help for? And I think that's been a really big pivot for me in these last, say, 10 years of my career, is asking for more help and really reaching out to influencers and people that are smart and I can learn from. And it's, the older you get, the more you realize you don't know. So I think humility has helped me on this journey. I'm constantly searching for more humility, but the older I've gotten, the more humbling the journey is.
That makes perfect sense. And I think kind of what you're alluding to, I mean, asking for help and, looking for that community. I genuinely think that, this is what I think about leadership and then community. If I have to put it like an analogy here, like a charging station, because people don't come because they are broken. They come together because they have been running hard. And without a place to recharge their own clarity, confidence, and connection, literally even the most capable leaders start operating on low power. And what you have built through
Mm,
Rise and now through
good.
Sight, feels like less like programming to me and more like infrastructure, where a place where leaders reconnect to their full power. Does that, am I saying it in the right way?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And I think, again, all these pressures from the outside world, whether it's a pandemic or now we work in these hybrid work environments, which I know offer wonderful
yes,
flexibility. I'm fully remote, but
yes,
it is harder to create community. I mean,
that's
let's
right.
just be honest.
Yeah,
We joke about the water cooler talk, and it's just human nature. It, Paula V, with your research, is just being with other people releases those positive chemicals like being in community. And when it doesn't happen on Zoom
that
or
is
on
right.
virtual call.
That's right.
So we have to be more intentional with it. I think that really creating community, whether it's for a work environment, and here's the other thing I've learned. I used to keep work and personal life so separate, but I think that's really a farce. I mean, we are just one person. So, I mean, we all want to be as authentic as possible. And we want to be in environments that, accept us who we are. And if I'm having a bad day and my dog is sick, I want to be able to talk about that at work and still feel like everybody's okay with it. So, creating safe space for people to show up fully themselves with discretion and discernment, of
Yes,
course,
yes.
I think is really important to this community and really helping people with a sense of belonging. I mean, you started out with that Gallup stats about people feeling engaged, and so much of it is my place where I'm spending 6 to 10 hours a day, my work. Does it value me as a human? Because if they don't value me as a human, I'm not going to be engaged. I'm not going to.
That is right.
It's probably, self-preservation, right?
No, that makes perfect sense. And I think that's why communities and intentional communities that are building in the world today, they are so important, because also you don't need to have all the answers. And there may be somebody else who may have other perspectives, other experiences that you can learn from. So let's talk about how that shows up in your role as now the CEO of Site, which is your current role. So if I may, when you stepped into the CEO role at Site, right? What pressures immediately came with it, like operationally, emotionally? I know there must be something, because when you're leading an organization, that intention is always there, but then you're also pivoting from one organization to another. So, what were some of the pressures that immediately you felt?
Yeah, the association, I love association. Professional associations for me, they're such a great match because it is a community that you can get to know. We're not consumer focused. It's a closed community, your membership. So even with the biggest association, there's some common ground that you feel like you have a kind of a plug and play community. So for me, stepping into my first CEO role in this association, I have been with associations before, but underestimated the balance of power, if you will, between, boards and the staff. And I think that you can't think that that's the same at every association either, because you step into a certain culture. Professional associations have a history. We have a 50-year history. There's a certain culture. It tends to be the natural dichotomy. Is it staff or volunteer driven? And so trying to find that balance where each side, if you will, feels empowered to do their best work. And that's something that I'm still working on in my 4th year, but I think I've gotten a lot more clarity on what drives behavior on both sides of that equation, and how it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Both sides, volunteers, they are board, these folks that are passionate about the work that we do, and this is their secondary job, right? They have very demanding day jobs, and then they come and give us more hours on top of that. They want to contribute, they want to do what they were elected by our constituency to do. So they take that very seriously. At the same time, we have a professional staff that was hired for their expertise. So how do we make sure that the staff is getting the subject matter expertise from the board without feeling threatened? And that's really what it comes down to, back to human behavior again, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a very tightrope to walk on as a CEO. And I've seen that firsthand, in a couple of organizations I have been, and everybody has the best intentions, but you're just trying to almost like mediate this whole transaction of the operations and what everybody's feeling. Are they feeling valued? So I know you value all of this so much, and that's probably you take a lot more toll about this because you genuinely care about this. So what inner leadership muscles have been most critical for you to develop during this transition and to figure all of this out?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's been a good challenge, but I'll still call it a challenge for me, is that there's 2 things. You do have a new board chair every year. So the style can shift, even though you have governing documents in an association like bylaws and policies and procedures that lay out some things. There's a lot left to interpretation. And so certain board chairs can have a different approach that once that varies, you might get your kind of your shorthand down with your current board chair. And then that board chair comes to a new change of command, if you will, and you have to get to know preferences again. So really kind of resetting myself each time. I'm in my 4th, we call the board president here. I'm in my 4th one, and each one has been very different. And on top of that, because we're a global association, we have members in 90 countries. All of my board chairs so far have been from different countries. So I've had just one in North America, and then the other 3 have been outside. So there's cultural norms that I'm getting used to. And so my American female approach may not land well. And so that's been something where I've had to just pivot. And I think finally a big learning for me is just not to die on every hill. And that's probably something I've grappled with my whole life is, I tend, like a lot of us smart driven women, we get convicted. We have strong convictions about things. And
Yes.
when we're challenged in a way that threatens us, I can dig in, and I don't need to die on every hill. I need to pick my battles. And I think that's going to just win more friends over time, right? Win more friends and
Yeah.
influence people over
Yeah, being
time.
more strategic about it. But, I know you do this work a lot, so I'm going to challenge you and go a little bit more deeper. So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you can recall like a moment as a CEO, okay, when
Yeah.
as you're managing all of this, when
Yeah.
nothing externally changed, okay, but your internal response did, and how did that affect, like everything felt different afterward? Have you had any moment like that? Because I think a
Yeah.
lot of times what I'm trying to, let people really see here on these in these episodes is that this is not just theory. When you actually
Yeah.
apply it in real life, how it actually changes your experience and how things
Yeah.
change externally. So stories like these are very powerful for people to actually see, okay, that's how Annette actually implemented that, or that's how it
Yeah.
practically looks like. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but if
Yeah.
you can
No,
think
I
of
like.
any moment like that and share with our listeners, I think that would be very powerful.
I appreciate the question. And I gave this a lot of thought. It's a little bit unique to associations, but it might have some relevance to anybody that works with a board.
Okay.
My aha moment was that the best ideas don't need to be mine or my staff's ideas. So I protect my staff. I'm a huge
Yes.
fan of my staff. I want my staff to be rewarded for these great ideas and all their hard work.
Yes.
So most of my approach, say with my board meetings, have been me and my staff reporting out on all this great work that we're doing. And to be honest and to be fair, we have really turned our association into an amazing place. We've had a swing of $1 million of revenue. For us, that is 20% of our operating budget. We've had that swing in 3 years. So it's kind of unheard of. It's an all-time high for the association.
Yes.
So I wanted my staff to get recognition for that. But what my aha was that we are over time going to get more support for the projects that we're trying to do if we let these volunteer leaders be the mouthpiece, and let them take the win. So we have a committee structure where even though my staff is doing their functional work, we have a volunteer that's assigned, as a board liaison to those things. So what we practically did is we revamped all of the agendas. So I am the last voice now to speak on these board meetings. And the first 90% of the meetings are all the volunteer leaders reporting out the good news. So they end up taking the win, but they do shout out to my staff. So I feel like my staff is now getting at least the credit for the hard work done, but we're letting that volunteer leader be the champion. And I think over time that has really helped smooth the waters of our relationship, and also just gained support for the initiatives we're trying to do.
This is so beautiful. And I have to say, we haven't really talked about this a lot, but you really actually, what you did was you applied the ATM framework that we talk about here a lot. Because if you think about it, what I'm hearing is you arriving before reacting, then you took responsibility for what's truly is important here. And then you made conscious choice under that pressure. So I really want to say this is so critical, because what I often see with most CEOs and boards that I have worked with and I have talked to is this: they are literally running at full speed, meetings, crisis, expectations, exhausted, but internally they are stuck in emotional overload. That's really what's happening. And that's when
Right.
leaders start reacting, solving the wrong problems, or holding back from the bigger strategic moves that are actually possible. They are literally spending their energy on things that doesn't really matter. But the moment they pause, they realign and they reclaim clarity, literally everything shifts. The decisions sharpen, teams are set up, communication improves, and opportunities that once felt like out of reach suddenly becomes real. So, and we are seeing a real shift in the workforce right now. I mean, there's another, like Deloitte reports that belonging increases employee performance by 56%. And yet, nearly
Wow.
half of professionals say that they feel disconnected at work, kind of what we're talking about. That gap has real leadership consequences,
Right.
and
Right.
that's why I want to come back to like what you're doing, because you have led across academia, revenue growth, and now a membership-led organization, right? So how has your understanding of belonging and community evolved across these roles?
Yeah. I love this topic so much. I think it kind of starts back with vulnerability and creating that safe space. I mean, I realize I'll talk first from the lens of a leader and then to the lens of our association. But from the lens of a leader, I have a small team and high functioning team. Everybody does their thing. And I tend to, unless you speak up, I tend to assume everything's okay. And especially in times now where there's a lot going on socially, geopolitically, there could be some anxiety among my team and just trepidation, even the traveling that we do. I mean, I'm going to the Middle East for our annual conference, and I needed to slow down and just take a minute and let my staff be heard and create a safe space for them if they're feeling any kind of fears or just any kind of anxiety or stress with the world going on. That the work we do, yes, and the traveling we do, yes, and just in general, and that was brought up recently in a team meeting we had because I was kind of just barreling through, say, you got to raise your hand, my philosophy, raise your hand, or I don't know, I can't read your minds. But I think as a leader, we have to kind of read the other signals that are not happening if someone isn't feeling comfortable to raise their hand. And we assume the older ones in the room have been through multiple disruptions, so it's kind of like, hey, we'll get through this too. But younger staff, this could be the first disruption. So they don't know how to go through some of these things, especially in a remote environment. That's one thing recently I've had to deal with just with my own leadership style, and then creating that place where we can just feel a sense of belonging and safe. And then as an association, what is that similar messaging where I can't take 3,800 members and be there for all of them on a phone call, but we can create that, we can model that behavior at our chapter level. So we have a lot of sub communities, we have geographic chapters, and we also have kind of special interest group communities, and just making sure that each of the leaders of those sub communities is equipped to have tough conversations and create safe space and just open environments. And we are very responsive to any member that wants to call, and we want to be as vulnerable and open and transparent as possible. And so we do have some pretty strict guidelines for ourselves about 24-hour response times, and we just want to make sure members feel like they have access to the HQ staff. So far, it's had some really good results. We have kind of all-time high retention and all-time high membership growth, which I do attribute to them feeling like they're getting value out of this mutual relationship.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And that all makes sense. So now I want to touch on this last aspect because I know you have such a great engaged board who actually cares about this stuff. So how do you see inner leadership and clarity shaping boardroom dynamics, and what kind of leadership support do CEOs and boards need more of today?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of the things you were talking about, reaction and that framework, because we're all human. Even the most evolved leaders are still human, and they're going to have triggers, and they're going to have times where even they don't show up well. So we have done a lot of training with our boards and our senior leadership staff on that approach and how we structure these meetings and how we make space for open dialogue versus more expedited decision making. So I think that's really critical when you have leadership that's volunteer and that just gets together every month or every quarter, is really giving real clarity on the use of that time together and what's expected of them as far as prep going up to that critical time together. Because if you only have a limited amount of time together, that is the really critical, important, say the most important time for idea generation. It goes back to the face-to-face. So we're only face-to-face 3 times a year. So how we craft that face-to-face time, it should not be report outs and things that people can read free. It should be for problem solving, for deep dialogue, for creating safe space, for concerns. And so we had to do a lot of training on how to make best use of that time and prepping people going into those times together. And I think that's a good learning for anybody that's running any kind of team meetings, really, or any kind of meetings, is when you have, say, your team retreat, how are you using that time differently, that face-to-face in-person time differently than your regular weekly team meeting?
You got to use it.
You got it. It's so special. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's interesting because this is exactly the kind of moment I work with executive teams and boards many times when that clarity inside the leader changes what's possible outside,
Mhm.
it makes perfect sense. And you see those transformation happening and how they're all coming together. Yeah, that really resonates with me. So before we wrap up, I want to come back to you for a moment. So when the pressure is high and the noise is loud, what's one practice or question or habit you personally return to that helps you stay internally aligned and lead consciously?
Yes. Well, I want to share. I've just read this book over the
Oh, I
break.
love that book.
Ah, oh my gosh, right? I think you did comment on that. So the
Yes,
professors from Berkeley, Dr. Keltner, and it
yes,
reinforces a lot of what I was doing, but I'm going to dive in deeper and
yes,
intentionally crafting awe in our lives and creating space for more awe and being in the present. And so we all deal with this. Gosh, how do I be more present in things? I'm just going through, I'm so stressed. I've got so much to do. I feel like I'm just going through the motions. I want to be more present, right? Everyone, I mean, it's a pretty
yes,
universal thing we hear
yes,
from leaders. And this gets into the neuroscience of it, that if you create more space in your time, in your routine for awe, your brain opens up and breeds more awe, right? More creative thinking, it releases oxytocin. So for me, one of the activities is just getting outside. It's really, really, now I'm fortunate to live in Southern California. I don't have weather issues that many of the states are dealing with
I know
now.
we have snow covered everywhere right now around our house.
Gosh, just can be beautiful, right? Until you have to drive in it, I'm sure. But
That's right.
I really do try to spend time every day in nature
Yes,
and be unplugged. And it does really revive my brain. I'll tell you,
yes.
and I do think I come up with some of my best ideas when I'm out in nature. So I try to take care of myself that way and just also physically. I feel like when I get those endorphins going from an exercise, I get some of my best thinking. So
Yes,
those are two
yes.
commitments I try to do every day.
Amazing nuggets. And I have to tell you, one of those I do not ever miss it, which is like 10 to 15 minutes outside, just spending time in nature. And I think another neuroscience here for our friends here, you already know this, but when you actually have direct contact with the earth, it actually helps you arrive in the moment right away.
Mm,
So in our workshop, actually, so this is what I actually talk a lot that you can't use the technology well until you know how it works. So that's like first important foundational leg that we work in the Lead from Within workshops, where we actually tell them, now you understand the science, how do we actually use it to your advantage? So like we all know we have to arrive in the present, but one of the big module that we do is what are some of the things that you can use your science to actually come in the present moment? And there's so many that you can actually use the science of your body and you automatically come in the present moment. So it's just beautiful and a little bit sad too that we have such a great complex equipment right here with us and we
yeah,
just don't know how to use it.
right.
It's just very fascinating. And that's why I'm so passionate about this work. That's how my own journey started. Because
Mm,
when I started learning about the neuroscience, I was like, oh my God, there is just so much we just don't know. And
yeah.
why? Right.
Right, right. And it's
Anyways,
encouraging because we're so complex and there's so many tools at our disposal right now.
yes.
That's what encourages me.
Yes, and I want to stop here because otherwise I'm going to go into tangent and start talking about all of that because I'm just so passionate. But let's come back to you. So, as you look ahead, is there anything you're especially excited about at site or anything you'd like our listeners to know about the community you're continuing to build?
Well, again, I'm a big fan of associations, and my association is specific to travel and incentives, which is reward programs for high achievers. So I would just encourage anyone that's in that space or has questions about that space to check us out at siteglobal.com or really just join something, join if you're not in my field. I would encourage you to find any kind of association or club because I think that's really where relationships. I have some of my lifelong friends that have come from me joining these societies and associations early in my career, and now they've
Yes.
been in my wedding, sort of those kind of stories. So that's what I'm just a big proponent of now more than ever in this polarized, crazy world we're living in, is to find community. And a lot of these communities are right there.
I love that. Well, Annette, what stands out to me is that the growth you have led in membership, impact, and culture didn't really come from pushing harder. It came from this inner clarity, from knowing when to pause, take responsibility for what truly mattered, and make conscious choices even under pressure. And that's really what I call here being on self start when your inner leadership stays online, regardless of circumstances. So, thank you for modeling leadership rooted in presence, purpose, and people. And to our listeners, as you reflect on today's conversation, notice where you may be leading on autopilot and where more conscious choice is available. And whether you're leading an organization, a team, or simply navigating a demanding season, this is the work of leading from within, keeping your inner leadership online when it matters most. And like I said, this is the work I do with leaders, executive teams, boards who want sustainable performance, clearer decisions, and stronger alignment without burning themselves or their people out. And I'm so grateful that there are leaders like Annette who are doing all this amazing work in practice. And I want to thank you again for joining us. And to all of you, see you next time. Until then, lead from within and be on self start. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
So that's it for today's episode of her Boss Brain podcast. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 private VIP day with Pallavi herself. Be sure to head on over to her bossbrainpodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Pallavi's gift and join us next time.